Anyway, we start with our usual prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily argue or cavil with each other. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is the Vedanta Series question and answer. If you have no questions, there are no answers. We already have one question from live as opposed to dead, a live participant here. But and if there are any other questions, I'll try and weave the answers together. So I'm going to block off my microphone while you formulate your questions. If you could say your questions in order, not all at once, that'll be fine. All right, so no questions are forthcoming. Blessed are you all. But we do have one question, and maybe I'll ask that person to come closer to the microphone and ask that question.
How to stop forgetting, Swami? I can get up in the morning and practice my mantra and feel connected, and then get caught up in the flow of the day, and at some stage something will happen, and stress and whatever, and then gone. So how to stop forgetting?
Good. Thank you for your question. So firstly, welcome to the human race. We're all suffering from forgetfulness. Of course, forgetfulness and remembrance are not up to us. Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I'm responsible for memory as well as its loss. So we have to consider that the Lord of the universe is our kind of filing officer. Before I go further, let me just plug in, because this is obviously going to develop into a talk. So let me... So if that is the case, if the Lord of the universe is our internal filing officer, then maybe we should pray, may we not forget you. Maybe that's the first thing we should be doing. And I know when I give people religious instruction, the last thing in your early morning spiritual practice, let's say you sit down for meditation, japa, in other words, making a deeper connection with the reality, then at the end of it, your prayer should be something like, may I always remember you, may I never forget you, something along those lines. The other thing is to unconsciously separate spiritual life with secular conventional life. Working, waking life seems to be something entirely different and separate. But if we have a very rich morning practice, then it acts like a battery charger for the rest of the day. So we have to get used to the idea that there is only one life, and that is spiritual life. There's no disconnect. Our purpose in life is realization of God, if you're a devotee, a bhakti, or bhakta. But if you are not, then the purpose of life is to find the ultimate absolute truth rather than the relative truth. Finding the absolute truth will lead you to the discovery of other truths also. So, in other words, if we have any kind of direction and purpose in life, it must be to do with our very, very foundation. When I talk to children, I put it in this way: life is a journey, we are the traveler, we come from God and we go to God. If you're setting out, for example, in a car, it's a circular route. You start off at a certain place, you set out, and you'll return exactly to that place. We are made in the image and likeness of God, to use devotional language, And that is our direction, that is our purpose. In between, we have a number of different purposes. There is a design within us that is in the context of the overall design of the whole universe. Lord Jesus puts it in this way. He says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." In other words, whatever our individual will is, has to be aligned to a cosmic will. Then we are moving and working in line with our particular individual skills and talents and abilities, and fulfilling our individual purpose in the context of our universal design. You have to understand there's something that we can do, nobody else can do, ever has done, ever will do. And we always have to remind ourselves of this uniqueness. This overcomes many psychological issues, such as deservability issues, where we somehow feel guilty for things done in the past and things that are in the present. And very often, if we feel guilty about the present moment, it's normally because we feel guilty about the past. So how do we perform work? First of all of us have to do work. That's a given. When we study the Bhagavad Gita, the emphasis is on this. Even if you decide to withdraw to a cave or a monastery. Yesterday we had the new mayor of Fingal Council and or Fingal District visiting us. He mentioned at the outset in his opening speech that his uncle was in fact a Cistercian monk, and for this reason he was not unfamiliar with spiritual life. Well, Cistercians are closeted monks. They sit in the monastery and they don't talk to anybody. There's a story of that one monk who joined the monastery for a quiet, silent life, and they conceded that once a year you are allowed to speak and give some kind of feedback, how are things going? Otherwise, nobody will know. And so this novice at the end of his first year, and he was only allowed to say a few words. That's all, very restricted, mostly dedicated to silence. So after the first year, "Please speak to us," says the abbot. Food bad. He was only allowed to say 2 words. The next year he comes along, he's entitled to say 2 more words. He says, "Bed's hard." And then the next year, "Room's cold." And then after that, the abbot couldn't stand it any longer. He said, "Please leave our monastery immediately. You've done nothing but complain since you arrived here." So we are not closeted. Those monks who are part of the Vedantic movement are far from being closeted. Why is that? It's because we recognize in this modern world, the emphasis is really more on karma yoga. We are all essentially karma yogis. We cannot sit for a moment without doing any action. Even if you withdraw to a cave, something has to be done. There's that wonderful book, Practice the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. He gives us really the art of work, even sitting in a monastic environment. So for that reason, he gives us this wonderful, thank you. He gives us wonderful examples in his book as part of interviews and as well as part of written communications. So I'll read an extract from this. It's very telling. He says, in the beginning of his monastic life, he had often passed his time appointed for prayer in rejecting wandering thoughts and falling back into them, that he could never regulate his devotion by certain methods as some do, that nevertheless at first he had meditated for some time, but afterwards that went off in a manner he could give no count of. In other words, his isolated spiritual life he found quite difficult. and that all bodily mortifications and other exercises for him he found completely useless, except as they serve to arrive at the union with God by love. That he had well considered this and found in the shortest way to go straight to him by a continual exercise of love. Now this is worth commenting on. If you are following the path of Bhakti Yoga, then what about Karma Yoga? Is there such thing as Karma Bhakti? And of course there is, and we find it in the Upanishads themselves. We find it in the second stanza of the Isha Upanishad. Kurvan evaha karmani jijiviset shatam samaha. Right from the outset, if you want to perform works, if you want to live for 100 years, in the ancient days it was seen, we should live 100 years, and life was divided into 4 sections of 25 years each, all called ashrama. First section of your life dedicated to studentship, that is, learning how to be a good citizen, learning to train the mind, learning the art of dharma, a harmony, a peace, so that when you go into the outside world beyond studentship, working as a householder, earning a living, either mostly in commerce, industry, agriculture, then you will be a model citizen, having dharma as your base. You won't do anything that is harmful to society. You'll be much less egocentric. All your activities, all your wealth creation will be for the generosity and good of all beings, everybody. Sarva Bhuta, all beings. All beings includes yourself. You're not separate from it. And then that goes on to, all right, at some stage or other, some retirement takes place, you'll fulfill any other legitimate desires, and then you'll concentrate on the thrust, the whole purpose of your life, to gain some kind of freedom. Devotional language says vision of God. So if you aspire to live for 100 years, in other words, a good, healthy, useful life, all your actions, unfortunately, if they're not in line with what I previously mentioned called dharma, all of these actions will be binding. Instead of getting your freedom, you'll be getting restrictions. Should we give up action then? Arjuna wanted to do it. Bhagavad Gita was very clear. He says, let me withdraw from all this. Killing is bad. I don't want any part of it. Previously I had done it, but now it's a different story. All my relatives and friends and teachers are there in front of me. So I have to resort to a cave. This is equivalent to kind of my interpretation of monastic life. I'll be peaceful. All right. That's a little selfish, don't you think? You'll be peaceful and other people will be disturbed. But you have skills and talents that you have to use. In other words, this alignment of individual will and cosmic will have to be done. Thy will be done, as on earth as it is in heaven, says Jesus. So how do we do this and yet maintain a living and work and career and all the things that are so important in today's life? And are monks immune to this? Swami Vivekananda introduced the idea, no, there's room for contemplative life, but service to God in man, why not do that? Why not uplift everybody? Please do it. And so he introduced also the idea of Karma Yoga, along with Dhyana Yoga, meditation, along with Jnana Yoga, discernment in your life as such, and along with all of these things, 4 yogas he prescribed: philosophy, work, worship, and meditation. Do one or more or all of these, but his inference was, we're not one-sided people, we should do all of them. So if we want to live for 100 years and work as part and parcel of so-called normal life, something that is increasingly necessary in today's world, how should we tackle it without actions binding us? There is a great clue in the theology, Christian theology, where on the Protestant Reformation, it was seen to be faith was emphasized. And then the opposite side of it was, yes, But in St. James' letters, he says, faith without work is equivalent to death. You have to work. And what does it mean by work? In the ancient days, it was a term that encompassed not only ritualistic worship, that kind of action, but also any action. And thought also is an action. And the question really is, how do we continue this constant remembrance? This is called technically Abhyasa Yoga. Abhyasa Yoga, whenever the mind wanders off, bring it back. But it has to wander off first. So we have to be generous enough to let it have some leeway. Come on, be distracted if you like. Go for a little walk, like taking a dog for a walk. Sniff here and there, but eventually please come back to me. Allow it some leeway, a philosophy that says, come if you want, stay if you can, go if you must. Some new things will come in. And this is the art of guiding thought, and doing it with action is called karma yoga. So what are our rights? Well, before we go on to that, let's conclude this stanza. You see, if you want to live for 100 years without your actions binding you, then renounce the fruits of your action, the rewards. Have no business with the effects of good or bad deeds. On what basis? On the basis that we don't have any personal energy of our own. All our energy is universal energy, freely supplied to us, unasked. We didn't ask for the sun to rise, it does it. We didn't ask for air to be supplied, it does it. We didn't ask for the diaphragm muscle to move up and down and breathe, it happens. We didn't ask that the mind be full of all kinds of useless thoughts. Like electrical current, thought is supplied as a current, and we are left free to do what we like with it. Useless thinking or constructive thinking is up to us. But all of this is delivered free of charge. We have no right to own it. No more than a fireman, when asked, did you put the fire out? Says, yes, I myself personally did it. No, wait. What did you do actually? I held the hose pipe, and actually the water did it. What was your job? Holding hose pipe. What was the effect? Fire was put out. What did it? Well, the water. Without the water, it wouldn't have happened. I cooked a cake. You cooked it? Or the electrical current did all the cooking, all the work. I drove a car to Belfast. You did it? Or the engine of your car did it? What was your role? I sat there. Oh, are you tired after your journey? You have no right to be tired. You just sat. It was the car that did all the work. You ask the poor car, how are you feeling today? Do you want some more oil? Must we give you some more fuel? Must we clean you? So we have to get used to this idea that all actions do not belong to us, their effects do not belong to us, the energy that we use does not belong to us, and the fruits of our actions do not belong to us. And we have to offer them back in a spirit of dedication. Even Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, understanding that yoga philosophy acknowledges some kind of God, Ishvara. Sankhya doesn't acknowledge such an entity, except maybe an accomplished soul who governs the universe, something like that. But otherwise, there's no devotional aspect to Sankhya philosophy. But yoga philosophy, its twin, makes this advance. We acknowledge that there is a teacher of teachers, we call it Ishvara, and that is responsible for everything, it's the source of everything. And so, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, in the second portion, we are told that mortification is Kriya Yoga, it's described as, that mortification, doing tapasya, controlling the mind, and controlling your actions, performing all your actions with an element of self-control. Knowing that our difficulty is the objects of the senses. And therefore, controlling the way we handle that will give us peace of mind. Otherwise, it's all disturbance. The most sought after subject or panacea for today's ills is said to be stress. How to deal with stress, a very popular subject. And you can do all kinds of techniques, mindfulness, breathing, what have you. But Here's the point. Unless you're able to direct the senses completely and therefore be immune to the effects of the objects of the senses, then it doesn't work. You won't get that peace of mind. So a certain amount of discipline is required. In anything you want to accomplish, in any work you do, an element of controlling time, how you use it, is necessary. You want to have an ambitious project and climb Mount Everest, don't think that you will do it with a sauntering attitude. Hard training is required. Same thing with everything in life. You want to learn a musical instrument, you practice every day. So practice. How do you engage a continuous remembrance? It requires practice. It requires consciously, deliberately, systematically taking your attention and saying, thank you, you've done some wandering. Now come back. Let's make you one-pointed here. And we'll wait until you wander again. That's the nature of it. And then we'll catch it. We'll notice it, we'll catch it and bring it back. So what are some useful tools in this? Well, the next part says, you see, is described as a kind of study. Tapaha is the first thing. But the second thing is study. What does study mean? It means keeping the mind tuned in to the principles of your purpose in life. And part of that would be repetition of a mantra. Somebody asked my teacher once, please tell me, how many times should I repeat my mantra? He said, 24 hours of the day. So 24 hours of the day, you repeat it. That means before you sleep, you repeat it. As you wake up, you repeat it. As you dress, you repeat it. Now, just repetition alone won't do it. There has to be some meaning and some feeling that goes with it. And that engenders for devotees a love of God. And a thankfulness comes in also. Lord, you supplied even the capacity to speak and think. And so with this in mind, let me tune my mind in continuously, like tuning into a broadcasting station. Whenever you see it goes off the station and you have to retune it, you retune it. Or driving a car. When you see that it's going off to the left, you automatically correct it to the right. In the beginning, you have to do it consciously. And then it becomes a habit. How to develop a habit is really the question. And then the final thing is surrendering the fruits of all your actions to God. And all these three things are called Kriya Yoga. That is that form of union that is directed towards purification of the mind. Taking all actions, kri, from the same word, same root is used for karma, kri, action, to do. What should we do? Now, Swami Vivekananda's commentary on this particular sutra goes like this. It's a very simple commentary he makes. He says, surrendering the fruits of work to God is to take to ourselves neither credit nor blame, but to give both up to the Lord and be at peace. All our actions we do with a sense of thankfulness, a sense of offering, and we don't take either credit or blame. Nor do we superimpose it on an unsuspecting God. When things go right, we say, that things are supposed to go right. When they go wrong, we blame God. And poor God must be sitting in heaven there, or I just got an email here criticizing me because there was a tsunami in the Far East and a lot of people got hurt and all the rest of it, and some died, and it must be an act of God. And some people claim their insurance rebates on this, Act of God is an insurance phrase, What is act of God? I don't know. Something that I didn't expect, some disaster. And blame a poor God governing in the heavens. This Ishvara in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is not that kind of God. But all the fruits belong to God because they came from Him. They are Him. And Jesus puts it in a different example of the vineyard. You're looking after a vineyard. You're an agent, if you will, looking after God's property. You think this is your body? No, God's body, His property. You think it's your mind? No, it's His office, His operational office, His throne room. By re-registering everything in this way, a kind of constant remembrance comes that is called abhyasa yoga, constant practice. Impossible to fix the mind on God for most people. And so what we do is constant remembrance, bringing the mind continuously back all the time. Now we have many, many clues to do this, many triggers to do this. There was somebody who kept begging me, please give me a vision of God, or can I have a vision of God? When will I have a vision of God? And I tried to tell this person and persuade this person, no, you see, whatever the eyes settle on, whatever your vision settles on, is God dressed up, don't you think so? When you see a tree, God dressed up as tree. What happened before the tree was there? God standing there, wove a tree around himself, and that made it lively, and you register, oh Lord, you are there. So you can take every single sensation that you have as a kind of way of revealing to those who are sighted. And how do we get this sight? Constant practice, constant remembrance. Attending these talks reminds us of these principles, and then we have to catch it up with some practice, practicing these principles. So always performing works here. One should wish to live 100 years. If you live in this way, that is, surrendering the fruits of all your activities to God, then there is no way other than this by which the actions that you do will not bind you. Normally they'll bind you, but when you shift your thinking, then this binding element of your activities is no longer there. There are many other references to this. Saint Gregory says, we ascend to the heights of contemplation by the steps of active life. And he's saying this in his book, Morals of Job. And the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, is a famous verse that many people like to quote. Karmani eva dikaraste ma palesho kadachana. Ma karma para etu bho mate sangosta akarmani. We have a right only to work. To work alone you have the right. Never to the fruits. Only to the work, to the working action. Now this brings in a popular subject called mindfulness. There's every activity that you do, you can do with full consciousness, full mindfulness. Whether you believe in God or not, this can work. The actual thrill of a movement, so that every movement, every work, every action is an expression of life or expression of the work that you have. When we teach us Hatha Yoga, the asanas, the exercises, I make quite sure that they understand. You're doing it for joy. You're not doing it to accomplish something, to lose 3, 4, 5 pounds. You're doing it to express the wonderful life and joy that is already within you. When you wake up in the morning, don't you enjoy a good stretch, a good yawn? Stretch the one side, stretch the other side, stretch the one leg, stretch the other leg, stretch the whole torso. How enjoyable this is, because the body is enjoying the thrill of movement. So all of our activities can be viewed as expressions. And with that comes a sense of thankfulness. With that comes a sense of upliftment, a sense of joy in the activity itself. But what about routine activities or activities we don't like? We can come to Brother Lawrence again. So he says that we ought to make a great difference between the acts of the understanding and those of the will, that the first were comparatively of little value and the others all. that our only business was to love and delight ourselves in God. What a beautiful passage. Then he goes on to, he is given a task. His task was to go and purchase some wine. I'll read the passage. In a conversation with a brother monk, he says this, that he had been lately sent into Burgundy to buy the provision of wine for the society, which was a very unwelcome task for him, because he had no turn for business. He wasn't business-minded, and he didn't like it. He didn't like handling money. So what to do? He has been instructed to do this. He has to go and do it. And because he was lame, so he had a walking difficulty, he couldn't easily walk, and he had to do this task, and could not go about the boat. He had to go by boat, but by rolling himself over the casks, that however he gave himself no uneasiness about it, nor about the purchase of the wine, that he said to God, see, now there's a conversation with God. This is part of the practice of the presence of God. So this is in the context of what we might call karma bhakti. Karma, yoga itself doesn't require a God. It just requires mindfulness of this present moment and renouncing the fruits of your activity. They don't belong to me. Now add a sweetness to it, offering all activities and their results to your most beloved Lord. So he says that he said to God, it was his business he was about. See the intimate dialogue. It's your business I'm going about doing. And that afterwards found it very well performed. As with that attitude, efficiency comes in. What is yoga according to the Bhagavad Gita? It is efficiency in action, skill in action, with equilibrium of mind. Two separate definitions are given. That he had been sent to Auvergne the year before upon the same account, that he could not tell how the matter passed, but that it proved very well. So likewise in his business in the kitchen, to which he had naturally a great aversion. He didn't like the kitchen. He didn't like cooking. Having accustomed himself to do everything there for the love of God, and with prayer upon all occasions, for his grace to do his work well, he had found everything easy. During 15 years that he had been employed there, it was easy. It was fun. All our activities should be fun. Now, that's a little extreme for many people, because several types of activities we don't like doing. First of all, things that we see no point in, but we have to do. Secondly, things which we are obliged to do as part of our duty, but we'd rather be doing something else. And repetitive things, things that induce boredom. But all of these activities, including the ones we like, don't forget, like and dislike don't come into this. Good and bad deeds don't come into it. Good and bad rewards don't come into it. No evaluation comes in. It's the actual act, it's the expression. It's the delight in what you're doing as you're doing it. And so, in the kitchen, he had a natural great aversion, having accustomed himself to do everything there for the love of God and with prayer upon all occasions for his grace to do his work well. Lord, may I do this work well. He had found everything easy during 15 years that he'd been employed there. That he was very well pleased with the post he was now in, but that he was as ready to quit that as the former, since he was always pleasing himself in every condition. He went in the monastery thinking, let me pay for all my sins and aberrations, and found it was a life of joy. So he was always pleasing himself in every condition by doing little things for the love of God. Small things, walking, cleaning, brushing the teeth, going out into a garden, observing the flowers, watering the flowers, doing some exercise, transporting yourself to your workplace, opening up the office, sitting there, planning, preparing, doing the actions, and at the end of the day, thanking for the joy that you had in all these activities. That with him, the set times of prayer were not different from other times. That's a very important thing he states. The time for meditation, the time for prayer, the time for japa, whatever you're doing, there's absolutely no difference because life becomes a continuous prayer. That he retired to pray according to the directions of his superior, his mentor, his guru, but that he did not want such retirement nor ask for it because his greatest business did not divert him from God. There was no separation in any of his activities. That as he knew his obligation to love God in all things, and as he endeavored so to do, he had no need of a director to advise him, but he needed much a confessor, Christian language for guru, to absolve him, that he was very sensible of his faults. Despite the joy, yeah, okay, it's a statement of fact. I'm good at this, I'm not so good at that. Statement of honesty, but not discouraged by them. Very important thing. In other words, no guilt is connected with it. That he confessed them to God, but did not plead against him to excuse them. And when he had so done, he peaceably resumed his usual practice of love and adoration. The question of love, adoration, wonder, and thankfulness is a continuous thing, whether it's during meditation with eyes open or eyes closed. Eyes open means our normal activities. That in his trouble of mind he had consulted nobody, but knowing only by the light of faith that God was present, continuously present, he contented himself with directing all his actions to him. That is, doing them with a desire to please him. Let what would come of it. That useless thoughts spoil everything, that the mischief began there, but that we ought to reject them as soon as we perceive their impertinence to the matter in hand, or our salvation, and return to our communion with God. It's a wonderful, wonderful mindset. That at the beginning he had often passed his time appointed for prayer in rejecting wandering thoughts and falling back into them. That he could never regulate his devotion by certain methods as some do. That nevertheless at first he had meditated for some time, but afterwards that went off in a manner he couldn't give an account of. All bodily mortifications and other exercises are useless, he goes on to say, except as they serve to arrive at the union with God by love. All along he's using the language of presence, union, communion, talking, prayer, and offering all these activities in the presence of God. And he found these two results. All actions were done efficiently to perfection. And they were all an expression of joy, no matter how much he initially disliked doing the activity, how much averse he was. So we have the right to work. We don't have the right to the effects because they don't belong to us. Let not your motive be the fruits of your action. Supposing you go through life doing all your activities, not worrying about what will come from it. Because future orientation creates anxiety. As soon as we put the mental direction into the future, anxiety comes to us. As soon as we go into the past, then there might be unpleasant reviews of doubts and fears and difficulties and guilt. So the question of why we have to leave off, why not, what next? And the future hasn't arrived yet. Insert what you want now, direct your thoughts now. That will mold the future anyway for you. You are the creators of your own future. That's the point. And let not your motive be the fruits. Ma karma pala hetu bhu. Ma te sangoste akarmani. But nor let your attachment be to inaction. That doesn't mean to say I give up action completely. The whole thing is under the heading of renunciation. Renunciation doesn't mean I renounce doing activities. Renunciation means I renounce all the effects and results of that. I'm not results orientated. That is karma yoga. The wise being ever minded, even minded, renouncing the fruits of their actions, freed from the fetters of birth, attain that stainless state. It's not a physical renunciation, it's a mental renunciation. And the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, at least the first section, is orientated to persuading Arjuna to please engage in this karma yoga, engage in action. But do it with steadiness of mind, do it with a certain inner joy, because you're not attached to what the results will be. And that means you're concentrated. That means you won't be bound by your actions. If you're not bound by the thoughts of the effects, you're not bound at all. All actions then become expressions. All actions become unit activities, one activity at a time, where your full concentration is held. Because the key to all these yoga practices is concentration. How do you want to concentrate? That means as you sit, for example, and do your work, or as you go about, say, in construction work or whatever it is, then your full energy, mental, physical, every fiber of your being is orientated toward only this single task and no other. We make mistakes when we get distracted. It doesn't matter what example you can give, from the disaster of Chernobyl to an accident, a car accident where all of a sudden the driver his attention is distracted for one moment. And next thing they find that they've plowed into a car in front. That moment of distraction is lethal or can be lethal. And so all of this is to do with training the mind. Training the mind through concentration. And what a delightful subject to be concentrated on, that is the companionship of the divine. So these are some thoughts in relation to this. Good and bad deeds are not the cause of transformation, says Patanjali. It's not to do with the effects of good and bad deeds. It's to tune yourself into the flow of the current which is moving you on. And this we call evolution. Evolution is being open to the transforming current that is already within you, that will manifest in fullness as time goes on. The 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita mentions this Abhyasa Yoga. It gives us various options. Starting off with fixing your mind. See the fullness of your concentration, what Patanjali calls ekagra, one-pointedness. But is that easy? For most people, not. So how do we gain that progressively? We do it by constant remembrance. And then, of course, if we say, oh, I'm suffering from forgetfulness, then the antidote is constant remembrance, using every single mechanism we can catch. Repetition of the mantra constantly is a wonderful way of doing it. This control of the mind, which we can call tapasya, because once you've controlled the queen bee of a hive, you've controlled everything, and the queen bee is the mind. So make sure that the mind is full of, there are two aspects of this. There's mindful, scattered mind, and mindful, means concentrated. If the mind is full of all kinds of things, going in all directions, then that's not mindfulness in the other sense of the word. And then having this direct relationship that Brother Lawrence is mentioning, this intimate conversation you have, so that there's always a constant presence of the divine with you at every given moment. I come as time, says Krishna. That means every second is his handheld presentation. Come on, my child, I am here. Put something in my hands. And we put all kinds of useless things. And the Lord of patience, come on, try again, try again. Unlimited opportunities, unlimited seconds, unlimited minutes and hours, and unlimited lifetimes also. So all these opportunities are there. And an attitude that plays the game with a sense of humor and sense of fun. Seeing the Lord's play, we say, let me play with you. Let me take you arm in arm and let me dance with you, play with you. Why not? So that every activity is not the quality of the activity you're looking for, or the quantity indeed. It is the quality in the sense that it's infused with divine energy and infused with a mindfulness of the giver of all things to you, the giver of your own energy, the giver of your resources, the giver of your capacities, the giver of infinite possibilities. And tuning into that constantly in a joyful way, in a joy-bearing way, so that life overall becomes delightful. Somebody who lives like that will have no issue with stress, will have no issue with individual conscience that provides us with a sense of dark guilt or depression or any of these things. That will not concern us with the past or the future. We'll be focused on what is here, what is now. Quotation always in that Joel Goldsmith's Art of Meditation, giving the definition of meditation so familiar to you by now, that it is a song of gratitude that God is here, God is now, God is love. Tune into that constantly. Don't be worried when it goes off. Thank the forgetfulness also. When the mind goes off, say thank you, go for a small walk. I'm not stopping you, but please come back. And when I call you, please come back. Like a dog, please go sniff here, sniff there. It's all right. You're entitled to a little sniffing, a little exploration. Have some fun, have some diversions. Wonderful. Now come back, please. And it's that constantly bringing the mind back and then doing all the activities that you have as expressions. What a wonderful way of doing it. So I hope I answered. And we have time maybe for some more brief questions, if you like.
Objects of the senses.
Oh, okay. So the question here is asking, what do I mean by the objects of the senses? All right. So I'll just remind you of the categorization of what we call life or nature. And at a certain level, our familiar waking world, 16 categories are there. There are 5 senses that bring in information. Beyond that, we don't have anything. Even scientific investigation would have to use instrumentation that makes us understand, makes it comprehensive to our interpretation of the senses. But the senses have no value unless there are objects of the senses. So the matching objects have to be there. And when we complain life is difficult, it's because the objects present us with difficulties. And the internal faculty, called the mind overall, has got the job in interpreting the objects. If we interpret the objects as a problem, life becomes problematic. If we interpret the objects as being a divine presentation with God dressed up in this way, available for us to interact in a delightful dance, then the objects of our senses become divinized. They become sublimated. They become wonderful presentations to our ears and eyes and all the senses. And then that affects the other senses, which are the reactive senses. 5 senses of information incoming. and 5 senses of outgoing reactions. 5 senses of action, karmendriya and jnanendriya. Jnanendriya, organs of information, knowledge. Karmendriya, organs of action. But the organs of actions are controlled by our reactiveness internally, how we interpret and deal with the objects of the senses. And our final interpretation should be there is no separation between the objects and the senses themselves, because the senses are made from the objects. The eye, the eyeball, is nourished by cells, certain cells of the body that require some nutrients, and we take that in from food. So the senses themselves are objects of scrutiny. We can see whether the eyeball is refreshed, whether the eyelid is okay, or whether it's scratchy, or whether it's inflamed, or whether it is fine and sparkling. We can observe whether the ear is hearing nicely, or whether we have buzzing sounds in it. We can fall down and we can be conscious of a scrape or scratch on the skin. That means we are separate from it. And the trick of life is we are this body. But clearly we're not. If we were this body, we could not observe it. Wherever there's an observer, where there's an object of observation, there's a separation between observer and observed, a perceiver and the perceived. Acknowledging this continuously is the process of discernment, what we call viveka, the key component of jnana yoga as a practice. Some people get confused. Oh, I don't like jnana yoga. It seems very tough, very abstract, etc. No, it's the practice of discrimination, discernment. Discernment between what? Activities that are useful for us, activities that are not. An evaluation of the world, is this permanent or is it impermanent? Is this good for me or not good for me? A continuous decision-making is going on already in you. You're already doing it. It's just to refine that so that it becomes useful, becomes elevating rather than bringing you down or keeping you at a status quo where life is just accepted and not questioned. Life has to be questioned. This process of questioning is called jnana yoga. Questioning what? Investigating. What I see as an object, is it really what it seems to be? Does it really appear to be? It appears to be like this. It appears to be fixed. But is it fixed? Or even if you think a rock is absolutely fixed and solid and it's not going anywhere, well, unfortunately, when you glide into what is called dream, it's gone. Maybe a representation of it is there in dream. And the whole thing goes off in a dreamless sleep. So the question of is it there or not is now a question for modern physics. And modern physics interprets at the quantum level the existence of something or non-existence of something as an irrelevant question. It exists when you observe it. When you don't observe it, it's held in an amorphous state of superposition, is the current interpretation. So there's a kind of mystical element to what we call physical life, not noticed ordinarily by us in the sense world. We take things as we see them. A discerning person will say, I will refuse to take things as I see them. I want to understand what is the truth about them. And then we come to a conclusion that all these things are impermanent. And when they are impermanent, we classify them as unreal. It's not that they're absolutely unreal, because there's a relative reality is there, no doubt. You know, if I want a table constructed and ask a carpenter, please can you construct it? Here are the dimensions. And the carpenter happens to be a philosopher and says, well, oh, it's okay, but it's all imaginary wood and it's imaginary dimensions and here's your imaginary table. It doesn't serve my purpose very well. So we have to have the facile, we have to have the easiness, the quickness to go between different worlds and different scenarios. And they're not contradictory. It's just that circumstances shift and change. And the scene in which we are in, we adopt that and play in that scene. And then we move to another scene. And playing life like this is a kind of game officially called Leela. And there's no other explanation for this world other than it's Leela. We ask, why did God create such a stupid world? We could have done a better job. The only explanation is it's a play of waves. Didn't you know it? Even when science investigates and comes to this conclusion that the fundamental basis of the whole of life is something like quantum fields, based on uncertainties and probabilities, nothing certain, appearances and disappearances. We call this Maya in philosophy. But at the sense level, we don't notice it at all. We see it as tables and chairs and objects and people and places and a series of scenes and events. So seeing things as they are is the art of cultivating jnana yoga. Getting great joy and upliftment in them and witnessing the inner joyful personal essence of it is called bhakti yoga. And doing all actions in a detached way, detached from the fruits, detached from the effects and the results, having no business with the results, just the joy of the expression called action, is called karma yoga. And intimately connecting in a silent moment to that intimate, ultimate, absolute, inner truth is called Raja Yoga or Dhyana Yoga meditation. And because we're integrated people, we can employ all of these things and should. Yes. All right. Good. So I think we've exceeded our time, and I hope it's been useful not only for the questioner but also for all of you. So it remains for me to wish you a very happy and useful Sunday, and happy Father's Day to those who are fathers. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good.